Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change. All right. Well, I am really excited to be sitting down today with Michael Nissen. We're in very different time zones because I'm here in Boulder, Colorado, and Michael is in Denmark. So we're across the world, but able to sit down for this conversation. I know Michael through the TRE community. He is a TRE trainer. But the reason I wanted to speak with you today, Michael, is your very significant contributions to TRE through your long study. So let me give a brief introduction of your professional background. So Michael is a licensed clinical psychologist for over 23 years. He is certified as a bioenergetics psychotherapist. He's a TRE trainer, as mentioned, and a former school teacher. And Michael spent a decade as a psychologist at the Danish Multiple Sclerosis Society, where he specialized in using TRE with over 1,000 patients with multiple sclerosis, as well as many with arthritis, fibromyalgia, and other diseases. In addition, he's worked in his private TRE practice with trauma, stress, anxiety, depression, et cetera, et cetera. And Michael has also done some significant research around his results working with TRE with disease. And so that's part of what we are going to include in our conversation today. So anyway, Michael, welcome, and thanks so much for taking time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Great. Well, the way I always like to start is kind of an origin story background kind of a thing. So maybe could you just share a little bit, how you made the decision to go from PE school teacher, and then you became interested in psychology, but the roots of all of that may have come even earlier in your life. But could you just share a little bit how you ended up going down this pathway?
Yeah. So it started very early in my life, because already with 15 in the school, I got interested in human destructiveness. So around 1980 already, in some kind of the same period we have now with the Cold War going on. And yep. Already back then we knew about the climate change that would come in the future.
Sure.
So why did humans not react more rational? Why all this destructiveness? So I started reading all the psychological theories, and some of them I found very strange, some of them interesting. But then when I got to Wilhelm Reich's explanation of human destructiveness, and especially how he differentiated between aggressiveness as a life force, right, and what happens if you stop this life force, that then turns into aggressiveness, to destructiveness, right, that really made sense to me already as a youngster. So that's when I got interested in it.
So can we pause for a second? This is timely because Wilhelm Reich has come up so many times in the podcast so far, because and I've only ever given just the briefest of context. And so since you're the person who's had the most Reichian influence and study, could you take a moment just for the audience, just who was Wilhelm Reich? Where was he based? Just a little bit of this pioneering body psychologist.
Yes. He's a very complicated personality, both his theory, his practice, and his life story. But I will try to make it short. So he was a pupil of Sigmund Freud, and made some very significant contributions to psychoanalysis already in the 20th.
Okay.
But he became very early a psychoanalyst, and he didn't feel that there was enough progress in the therapies he was doing.
I see.
And his older supervisors, they said, it's because you're young and you're impatient, just keep on analyzing. But what he also realized was that when he was analyzing, different kind of body reactions came. So he thought already in the end of the 20s, in the beginning of the 30s, and especially when he was a refugee in Denmark in 33, he found out that you could go through the body instead of going through the mind to the deeper emotional layers, and in this way try to solve people's problems. So he was the one starting body-oriented psychotherapy. In the beginning, just having people breathe. And then he developed different kind of techniques and methods. And yeah, so he also talked about the body armor.
Right.
So
was he the first? Was he the first to use that term or that
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So he first had a term called character armor, and that he developed into the term body armor. So he was the first to have a system and to systemize how the blocks in the body develops through the early childhood and how we can dissolve them. And of course, how to dissolve them. Now we have a lot of methods to dissolve them, but he was the first back then to start this pioneering work.
What did Freud think of Wilhelm's sort of studies?
Yeah, so Freud, he turned 70 in 1927, and Wilhelm Reich dedicated his book he published that year with the name "Function of the Orgasm" to Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud only had one comment that thick about the book. So he was certainly not happy about it. So he found it was a wrong direction.
I see. Interesting.
But at the same time, it's a sad story, because at the same time, we know that Freud wrote somewhere that in the future, maybe we will find the place where the psyche meets the body.
Ah, okay.
And that's what Wilhelm Reich found, and that's what we're working with today. So it's so sad that Freud was not able to be more flexible.
I see. So where were they? I don't remember. Were they in Austria or Vienna or Germany? Where was Wilhelm Reich from?
So he was from Austria-Hungary, and he met Freud in Vienna in 1919 after the First World War.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that historical context. So anyway, so you were a youngster, you were reading Reich and many theories, but he especially sort of captured your imagination and these thoughts around aggression. And so I interrupted you. So keep going with your journey.
Yeah. So with 19, I had some problems like we all have, and also in this age, of course. So I started in psychotherapy, and because I read so much about it already, I thought it has to be with the body included. So I started in bioenergetic analysis with 19, and was quite impressed about the progress you could make that quickly. But also, I could see that it's a longer work to solve problems from early childhood. Okay. So I was in a very long body-oriented psychotherapy in my 20s. And it was too early back then for me to study psychology. I didn't feel mature enough to do that. So I needed a lot of therapy first before I could do that. So instead, I studied to become a school teacher, and my subjects were music and athletic. So I had a lot of fun 4 good years with a lot of music and moving.
Oh, cool. in that course of bioenergetics therapy for you when you were 19 and in your 20s, and so because it was bioenergetics, that means it definitely included the body. Did that kind of show you at all firsthand the role of the body in terms of doing psycho-emotional work? Was that very clear to you at that age?
Yes, immediately.
Yeah.
And I was both in individual therapy and in group therapy. So I could feel it on myself and I could see it on the other people participating.
Great. Okay, wonderful. All right, so yeah, you weren't quite you didn't consider yourself, you couldn't jump right into psychology. You had your teaching years, which sounded enjoyable.
Yeah,
And that, but at some point you shifted. What happened there?
yes. Um, I think I was just too much interested in the connection between mind and body. So I had to make it my profession also.
Got it.
I like pedagogics and children and working in schools very much, but I could just feel this is my path, working with the connection between mind and body, both in praxis, but also theoretically, I was very interested in it.
Great. So you enrolled in a clinical psychology program. Was that the next step?
Yes, so I enrolled at the university in Copenhagen to become a psychologist. And at that point, I felt this would take at least 5 years. And doing 5 year theoretical study without the body, I thought, no go, I won't survive. So I decided to study to become a bioenergetic therapist at the same time. And we didn't have really good organized education in Denmark. So they had that in Germany. So parallel with my psychology study in Denmark, I traveled forth and back to Germany to become a bioenergetic analyst.
I see. Okay, and you were able to coordinate doing the two simultaneously.
Yes, it took a little longer time than expected, but I had to finance it also. But I succeeded.
Yeah, very cool. And then I know you ended up traveling to Berlin and living there at one point. Was that immediately, or did you go into private practice for some time first, or?
Yeah, first I went to Berlin in the beginning of this phase to improve my German. So I stayed there for 4 months and did intensive German training. And then I went back to Denmark to study psychology and travel forth and back for 5 years to Germany. And then after that, or actually all the time, I had been very interested also in psychosomatic. And with all my respect and for bioenergetics, I didn't find that they had enough about disease. So I wanted to find somebody who practiced body-mind therapy and also had more approaches and also theory about how to work with diseased people. Yeah.
Was there and so yeah, so you're saying that bioenergetics, they didn't go that deeply into disease. Is that because they were more focused on like things like anxiety, depression, neuroses? Is that the reason? Was that more of the emphasis, or?
Yes, I think that's the reason. It's not that they don't have it. Alexander Lowen wrote a beautiful book about the heart and heart diseases and broken hearts. So it's not that they don't have it. He also wrote about cancer and other things. So we have it in bioenergetics. I just needed more about it.
I see.
And this is more in the Reichian traditions because they focused a lot on diseases because many of them, they were educated as medical doctors. So they have been working much more with chronic diseased people.
I see. Was there, so your interest in so psychology for sure, because you're a psychologist, but now you're interested in disease and physiology and the link.
Yeah.
Was there a particular reason why you felt that you wanted to know more about disease and study with a more medical Reichian approach? Was there some reason, or you just felt a calling towards that?
Many reasons. I think one of them is that in Western culture we have this split between mind and body, and we have this split between psychiatric diseases and somatic diseases. And of course, we have psychiatric disease and we have somatic diseases, but we don't have an overall view about disturbance in the psyche and the body. So because of this, I found it interesting to study somatic diseases from an emotional view. And I did my diploma work, my candidate work in psychology about Parkinson's disease.
I see.
And there I used Wilhelm Reich's theory to try to explain if there could be a psychosomatic element in Parkinson's disease.
I see. Well, so when you're referring to somatic diseases, could you just name some of the most common ones? Just a list of some of the most known ones. So Parkinson's. Yeah.
First, I could say that in Denmark, we are 5.5 million people, and we have 700,000 people who have chronic diseases. So that means 20% of the population has a chronic disease. So it's a lot, I think, in most populations who have chronic diseases. And this can be there are seldom diseases, and there are very common diseases like heart problems, arthritis. This is really a huge disease. Multiple sclerosis, which I worked a lot with, was not that common when I started. There was in Denmark 7,000 who had it. Now, 15 years later, there are, I think, 18,000. So it more than doubled in this period.
I see.
Yeah.
Would somatic, and would you include like autoimmune diseases or fibromyalgia? Would those be included in? I mean, when you say somatic disease, you're just kind of referring to the whole gamut of
diseases. Yes.
Okay.
It's just to separate it from psychiatric diseases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then when I studied Parkinson's disease, I could see that it was like psychosomatic had been very big in the period of psychoanalysis until the 50s or maybe into the 60s. But then as psychiatry became more biologic and was more focused on medicine than psychotherapy, I could see that psychosomatic had a less and less importance in medicine. So that was also a reason for me to go into this field.
Got it. Okay. Really interesting. So you ended up going to Berlin because if I understand, you found a physician, a doctor who specialized in a Reichian approach around disease. Is that correct?
Yes, this is correct. Yeah.
That sounded like a really interesting period of time of about 5 years. Can you just talk about what you learned and grasped during that period of time?
Yeah. So first of all, I studied the writings of Reich, but also all the people who came afterwards. And there are some journals like very few people read, and it's also some of it quite orthodox and a little too rigid for my opinion. But there was a lot to learn anyway, to try to understand if we could have a more systemized way of understanding psychosomatic and how emotional disturbances can influence and turn into a disease. So this was what I was studying, and I tried some of the method on my own body in psychotherapy. And at the same time, I worked with psychiatric patients also using the method. So there was a lot to learn in these 5 years.
So that's what was happening during. And were you working kind of closely with the doctor? Like, were you sort of like observing his treatment approach as well, or what did you learn from your, I guess, mentor? Maybe is the best
Yeah,
word.
yeah, it's a good name. So I both had therapy in his method,
Okay.
and I assisted him on some workshops, and I had supervision on my clients.
Right.
And he also supervised my work for my psychology diploma about Parkinson's disease.
I see. Interesting. So with his was he was, I know, trained in the Reichian tradition. Was he trained by Reich or just in that
He
through,
was too young for that because he was born the same year as Reich died.
okay. Okay.
But he was trained by several of Reich's pupils.
I see. I see.
Yeah.
And so what were some of his, I mean, so breath work, was there massage, was there shaking? What were some of the methods in his toolkit in addition to the psychotherapy side?
Yeah, so he was educated in Wilhelm Reich's late work, which is called orgone therapy.
Okay.
But he had problems with that because he found that was a little problematic because of several reasons. So he developed that into a quite radically changed other method.
Mm.
So what he did was have people standing in stress positions, like we also do in TRE, like you also do in bioenergetic.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, he was pushing different kind of acupuncture points. So he was like you try to stimulate the energy flow or the chi or whatever you choose to call it at the
Mm-hmm.
same time as you're vibrating in a stress position.
Ah, I see.
This is the first point, but then after that, you go into a relaxation where you more go into energy flow, and then you have different other techniques to have this energy flow going through the body.
Mm.
It's quite a hard method, but you feel wonderful afterwards.
When I spoke with you a few weeks ago, if I'm remembering correctly, you used a word that isn't very common in my own vocabulary around, but it sort of made sense. But I didn't ask you about it. But I think you said something. I think you used the word streaming. Um,
Yeah,
can you describe that a little bit?
yeah. This you feel in this kind of therapy in the end, that you have the feeling of energy flowing through the body,
Mm.
like you can also have in yoga or in Tai Chi. And in Reichian terminology, you call it orgone energy. Uh, I'm not so interested in names of the flow. I'm more interested in the phenomena.
Right.
I think it's something that is talked too little about in also in body-oriented psychotherapy.
Mm.
That today you're more interested in getting in a relaxed harmonic state, but these wonderful streaming sensations, I think, is also a nice goal to have.
I see. Okay, I love that. Okay, great. All right, so that captures a bit about what you were doing under that mentorship. Very cool.
Yeah.
So then by then you're highly educated. You've done your thesis on Parkinson's. I think you head back to Denmark. And when was
Yeah.
it pretty? And then you landed a role in the Danish Multiple Sclerosis Society. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason I picked that was, first of all, because people who get multiple sclerosis is often women in their 20s or 30s. You have
Mm.
double as many women as men. And that means they stand in the beginning of their life. Maybe they already had 1 or 2 kids. They just start working after their education, or they're in the middle of their education, and then they get this serious disease.
Mm.
So I wanted to see if all the methods I had learned was able to influence this situation. And this was one of the half of it. The other half was that I was also interested to see, because multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disease where the autoimmune system attacks the central nervous system. So if we are able with a method like TRE or body-oriented psychotherapy to influence this condition, that means we have evidence that we are influencing the central nervous system. And I found that very attractive to investigate.
Cool. So can you kind of and you were there about a decade or so, is that right?
Yeah, 12 years, and I still have a collaboration with them.
Okay, so it's ongoing. So maybe, I mean, I want to get to the sort of the results, the research, and because I know the end of the story, which is that you learned a lot and it was very effective. But I wonder if you could just describe, those early years. Was it, did your method seem strange to your colleagues, to the patients? Did you feel confident? Was it a bit of a leap? How was those early years for you?
I was a little concerned arriving back to Denmark with all these methods. And in Germany, they are very open. So in Germany, you have a tradition for complementary medicine going more than 100 years back. So I was quite concerned, but I had luck, because one of my colleagues, she was also a body-oriented psychotherapist and psychologist, and my first supervisor, the same. So my first supervisor, in the first week, he said, "Michael, immediately go out and buy a mattress and start using your methods." And that solved it.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Wow. So what would be so when you would meet, so you had a room, a mattress, so what was, when you would have a new patient, did you just jump right into some of these somatic methods? Did you have to describe it for them? What was kind of your approach to bringing them into this practice?
So I was employed as a psychologist, meaning that they came to me expecting to talk. Most people had no idea that a psychologist could also work with the body. So that was my working conditions. And because of that, and of respect for the clients, and also to make a safe space, I used the first hour to talk, which also, of course, made a lot of sense because they had a lot to talk about. Many people were newly diagnosed, or they had their disease worsened. So there was a lot to talk about. But already in the first hour, I said, the next hours, we could talk half of the time, and then we could do body work the other half. And I think almost everybody said yes. And almost everybody said, that makes totally sense. Of course, there's a connection.
So it was intuitive.
That was so interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, and that was so interesting for me, because here I had a totally average of the population, because anybody can get this disease. So you have a total average, and everybody just said, that makes sense.
Interesting. Yeah. So was it pretty, so after you began working this way, was it pretty early that you thought to yourself, hey, this is helping, they're benefiting from this? Was that pretty clear to you almost immediately, or how did you get the positive reinforcement that you were doing something very helpful?
It was obvious very quickly, but I didn't use TRE maybe the first half year or year. So I used bioenergetics and orgone therapy, and this is very effective. But my problem was I only had 5 hours per client, and of course I couldn't go deeper into a psychotherapeutic process. And I had some bioenergetic exercises they could do at home. But it was quite difficult to introduce them to bioenergetic homework in 5 hours or 4 hours.
Mm, mm.
So I had supervision by Heiner Steckel, the TRE trainer also, but I had it as Bioenergetics back then. And then he told me about TRE, and I could hear that this could be very good for my working situation, because here you had a self-help method which you could introduce in 4 or 5 hours. So I went to Germany and had the education by David, as he was he was teaching in Germany, and assisted David in Poland on workshops. And then I started using TRE, and that was a revolution, because suddenly I had a much more simple method which could be introduced very quickly, and the people could do homework, which was very simple to do.
I see. Okay. Fascinating. Okay, so because when we spoke last time, you said you used a funny phrase that I liked, and because I was asking about the difference, that there's Reich's work, and then Alexander Lowen's bioenergetics, and it's a whole system of psychotherapy and all these body practices that includes tremoring, and of course, Dr. Berselli was trained by Alexander Lowen as well. And so in a way, we could look at TRE as a subset. The neurogenic tremoring in TRE, we could look at it as a subset of what's coming out of the bioenergetics tradition. And you used a funny phrase, which is, hey, isn't this new wine, or no, the same wine in a new bottle, or something like that?
Yes, exactly.
Which I thought was great.
I was asked that at a conference as I was introducing TRE. And an old guy, he asked this question, and I said to him, "You're totally right, but it's a damn good wine."
But it's a damn good wine. So can you just share a little bit more about the because what I think I'm hearing from you is that there's something around the format of TRE that makes it a little bit easy. It's easier to learn, easier to apply in a self-help way. Could you just describe why those attributes, the sort of the distinction about the TRE format as compared to what you had been doing?
Yeah. So I think this is David Berceli's great contribution to therapy and working with stress and trauma. That is that he was able to take a very complex psychotherapeutic method, which takes a long education to learn. It takes many years to have a real good effect in that psychotherapy, and to make it into 7 exercises and a self-help method. I think this is his greatest contribution, because it's so simple, and many people have this working situation that you don't have 5 years for psychotherapy. I want to say, and it's important for me to say at the same time, I'm very big fan of very long psychotherapy for many people.
I see.
Because I think there you reach something else which you don't reach in TRE.
Yeah.
But also, David is very realistic here, that many people, they will never afford it, or they won't have the time, or they don't even know it exists. So we need something parallel to long psychotherapeutic approaches. And so I think it was very clever to go to Alexander Lowen. He also participated in Lowen's exercise class and saw all the exercises. And then to make it into these 7 exercises, this is really clever thought. And for me, fitted perfect at that moment in my professional life.
So once you learned, so Heiner Steckel kind of showed you this format, and then now you realized this would be a more efficient or streamlined way to, especially your patients where you have 5 total hours, where you could get them started in a self-practice. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
When people did that, when they started it, when you got them going in TRE, after those 5 hours with you, if they needed additional support, or they wanted to contact you, were they able to, or not really? It's sort of like
it was flexible. It was flexible. It was a plus minus 5 hours.
Okay.
So I also had many people for much more hours.
I see.
And especially if you had deep emotional problems at the same time with a chronic disease, and also the people who really got sick from the disease, some of them, they needed more hours, of course. So it was flexible.
I see. Well, could you share some of the stories or I guess maybe before you did the research side of it, where you kind of quantified the effectiveness, but before that, what were the kinds of feedback you were receiving that let you know, yes, this is working well for my population?
Yeah. So already from the beginning, I took a lot of notes. So I think in science, we have much too little emphasis on what you call anecdotal case material. All the stories that the clients, they tell themselves, how the clients experience the change, how they interpret their situation and the effect of, for example, TRE. So I took a lot of notes, a lot of case stories, and I asked a lot of questions, both about how they saw their disease themselves, if they found any psychosomatic relation. Of course, I didn't ask it this way, but many, they just told it themselves, that I had a very traumatic childhood, or I had 3 years of stress on my work because my boss was mobbing me, or I'm in a very complicated marriage. All these kind of things, they had that as an explanation for why they got the disease.
I see.
And nobody listens to that. So I took notes, and then I took notes of all the effects of using TRE. And that was a lot, because in MS, in multiple sclerosis, because it's a central nervous system disease, that means you can get almost any kind of symptoms, because everything is.
What are some of the more common MS symptoms?
Yeah, for example, you have fatigue as a major symptom, and really problematic symptom, because many, they have to stop working because they're simply too tired.
I see.
Spasticity, which is a kind of cramp situation in the musculature, can be very, very painful, and we have medicine against it, but it has quite serious side effects. Problem with balance, pain, numbness, bladder and bowel problems, sexual disturbances. So, and then you have mental, you have increase of depression and anxiety, for example.
I see. I see.
And all these things I mentioned now,
yeah,
it's possible to influence with TRE. Not to solve, of course, but it's all symptoms. It's not the disease in itself. And there I've seen with TRE so many people where it was possible to change a little or totally take away.
Well, that was my next question. Is your view that TRE or these other things when you're working with a patient? I mean, of course, your goal is just to get as much possible help as there is. But is your attitude that we might reverse this disease process? We might reduce the symptoms. We might slow down the progression. Well, how do you conceptualize sort of the what's the range of results, I suppose, when you work this way with MS, I guess, specifically?
Yeah, it's very complicated, because I think also in TRE, but also in other methods, we really have to watch out that we don't go out and say that this and this and this disease is mainly psychosomatic. Because by most diseases, we simply don't know why they start.
Right.
We can have our hypothesis, but we don't know.
Yeah.
So I would never go out and say that multiple sclerosis is a psychosomatic disease.
Yeah.
because we don't have evidence. I would also never go out and say that we can influence the disease with TRE.
Yep.
But I am telling all the time that we can influence the symptoms.
I see.
And people can have a much better life.
I see. Okay. Well, so could you share, because so then, you know, you've done a lot of papers and research, and I regret to say I haven't read them all specifically, but I wonder if you could share a little bit, like, were these I guess, what was the structure of this research? Maybe just share how you approached getting these research results. How did you go about doing that?
Yeah, so we did it because we could see so good effect. And so we looked at all the results, the qualitative results or anecdotal case histories. And so what are the major symptoms we can influence?
Right.
And then, of course, we wanted to focus on that in the research. And some of the major symptoms we studied were spasticity and fatigue and bladder problems, which can be very problematic to have.
Yep.
So this was some of the major things we were studying. And then the problem with studies are mostly that they are too short. So I made it quite intense. I would never work so intense with people normally, but we only had 7 weeks for the first study. And so we made it very intense. And that means in the first study, actually, people, they had better effect than normally of TRE because we worked so quickly, and we were quite lucky that the people, they could tolerate this a little too quick way of working.
What was that, every day or something, or what was the cadence?
Yes, they had to do it at home every day, and then they saw me once a week.
I see. For 7 weeks. So they did every day for 7 weeks, once per week with you. I see.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. And
there I can tell several stories from this study, because we had people who were so tired, and I could just see on their body, this person have had so much energy earlier in her life, and then after 7 weeks, the person were cleaning the whole house, and normally she was too tired to do this, and she had immense energy suddenly. And I met her several years after, and she is still doing great. So in the first study, we had really good results.
Great. And then,
but it's still important to say that it's a pilot project. So it's not big studies. So we don't have these big studies, which would be good for TRE to have.
Yeah.
And to do a pilot study is, of course, to make the first step. So we did 2 studies in the Danish Multiple Sclerosis Association. And then I was contacted by a neurologist in Argentina who is called Marcella Fiol, who is also a TA provider and works at the neurological department in Buenos Aires with multiple sclerosis.
I see.
She's very interested in complementary medicine. So she wanted to do a study based on our first study. And we had the results last year, and they had good results also. They saw improved quality of life. And then they had, in this study, we have a very interesting result also, because they could prove that doing TRE for a person with multiple sclerosis was not an extra burden in their everyday life. And that can seem like a small thing, but it's not a small thing if you have a chronic disease, because you're so overwhelmed with all the things you need to do.
Right. How did they demonstrate that it was not through the people basically reported that they didn't find it strenuous, or is that how they knew? Or
It's a questionnaire, so it's I didn't know that you could find out that in research, but it's a questionnaire where you get this result.
I see.
So
I see. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Wonderful.
yeah,
So your specialization obviously was largely with multiple sclerosis, but have
yeah.
you had the opportunity to explore the effectiveness of TRE on other disease? You mentioned arthritis,
Yeah.
fibromyalgia. Well, what's your
Yeah.
experience with other chronic diseases and TRE?
Yeah, so I and a colleague, we were contacted by the Danish Society for Arthritis, that they had heard about our results with multiple sclerosis. So they wanted to see if it could have effect on arthritis. And in this association, they have fibromyalgia as part of this association. So, and arthritis is 200 different kind of diseases.
I see.
We did, they wanted to make an evaluation, and they had money from one of the biggest foundations in Denmark to finance it. And we worked with two groups with 20 or 22 in each group. We had 2-day workshops, and then after that, they had to continue to do it for, I think, 5 or 6 months. And in between, there were some evaluation, and in the end, of course. And the psychologist who was in charge of the evaluation was very impressed of the work, and it had a really, really good evaluation. Some people said it was a total life changer for them, and some people they couldn't believe their eyes because symptoms they had had for years decreased a lot in quite quickly.
Mm.
And again, it's important to say with all kind of diseases that you can never expect the same result for everybody. For some, you can get a little effect, and some, they have a lot of effect. But my experience through all the years is it's also dependent, of course, of how long you're doing it. I've been following one woman here in Denmark, and she has done video with her effects. She has been in television telling her story. She has been in newspapers telling her story. So I can also tell it here.
Mm-hmm.
I met her when she was around 60, and she had to retire as a school teacher because she was so influenced by multiple sclerosis. And then she met a woman in a sauna, and the woman heard about her disease, and then she said, "But if you have that and all these symptoms, you have to go to psychologist Morin Nissen." And she said, "But I don't need to see a psychologist." And then she said, "It's not because he's a psychologist; it's because he can this method. He can teach you this method."
Right.
So she came, and she had a lot of symptoms. She had had the disease for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So she was really tired. She had a lot of fatigue. She had a lot of rigidity in her body and many other symptoms.
Mm.
And after doing it for some years, it was decreased like she had never expected. So because of this, she thought, I need to give this to other people. So she took the TRE education, and now she is in the age where she should normally have retired.
Mm-hmm.
But she has so much energy, and she is so fond of teaching TRE that she says, no, I would never retire. So now she's working in 2 physiotherapist practices, not only one, in 2 different,
Right.
with chronic diseased people.
Wow.
With great results.
Oh, that is so cool. What a story.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so when you said that there's it's not that the intervention will not affect each person the same, if that makes sense. And then you said also a factor is sort of a duration. And could you share a little bit if somebody when people contact you about their own MS or other chronic disease, do you have any like rules of thumb or ways of thinking about how do you tell them, well, do it, let's do it for 1 month and then evaluate? What's your own thought about the timeline of this sort of these sort of practices, TRE specifically?
Yeah. So when I work with chronic disease people, you have a quite special situation because many of the people have tried many other methods also.
Right.
And also you can have some clients who have used a lot of money on complementary medicine, and some of them with very little effect. So I really want to watch out that I don't push the method too much on people. So I try to have an atmosphere where people feel as free as possible to choose or to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And I also try to give it to them as a self-help method. I prefer that people see me at least 3 to 5 times if they have a chronic disease, mm-hmm. because as you know, many things can also go wrong. Mm-hmm. And then I see that many people also, if you do only TRE, could benefit of coming for a very long period because there are so many things to be done.
Right.
And you can help a lot with all the different kind of interventions we have. And I added a lot of different things also when I work with chronic disease people.
Right.
So, but I want people to feel free to choose.
Right.
And to make the decisions.
And just a comment for a moment, just in case anyone in the audience, just to paraphrase, what you're saying is, on the one hand, you're holding it, empowering it as a self-practice because there's a lot of benefit, of course, to safe, consistent self-practice is a wonderful thing, but also because it's independent and there's no cost. But part of what when you say, that many people can be helped by interventions, what you're referring to is that when there is a provider, there's a number of ways that a provider might be able to help expand or improve or deepen the effectiveness of the tremoring process. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And mostly when I meet people, the way they would do TRE without help from a provider would be in a way where they are actually keeping themselves in the same condition. So it's amazing to see how people can put themselves in positions where they stay in their condition instead of moving towards change. So I think for everybody, it's good to see a provider. Yeah. It's a self-help method, but you need guidance in the beginning because in the best way, you just keep the state, but in worst case, you get quite serious problems. Yeah. And if you have a chronic disease, then you have to watch out even more because we want people to get better. So it is amazing that they can do it themselves, but you really need guidance in the beginning because how should people know how to move through this?
What's possible and how to go in a direction of progress. Yeah.
But I had the dilemma that so many people have chronic diseases and so many people have multiple sclerosis. So I was asked by the Danish Multiple Society to do videos so that they on their homepage could have videos where I guided people through the TRE process. And I was quite in doubt if I should do it because I wanted people to see a provider first. But also, as David Bacelli also said, you can find so many unauthorized videos where the people say, TRE, just do it, just follow the body, nothing can go wrong.
Right.
And we know that's not right. So I thought, okay, the situation changed. I have to reconsider. Yep. So I decided to do it. And these videos are also on my YouTube channel, which is called TRE Denmark.
Great.
And there you can find both a video where I guide people in English through all the exercises if you have multiple sclerosis, but actually everybody can use it.
Great.
And then also I have one where I guide people if you're not able to do the exercises, where I show all kind of alternative versions to do the exercises.
Perfect. Great. We'll include that in the. Well, I'll include those links. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on this YouTube channel, I also have 2 testimonials, which I think is very touching. One is a woman in her 20s telling her story, doing TRE with multiple sclerosis for 3 years, and one woman who have been doing TRE for 12 years.
I see. Great. Wonderful. So what do you think, Michael, what do you think the future of, where do you think this will go? Like what research would you, like what research do we need? What, if things went beautifully from your perspective for the next 10 or 20 years in terms of the dissemination of these methodologies like TRE, what do you think is possible in your mind?
I always prefer to talk about 100 to 200 years because I think it's more realistic, if I'm allowed to tease you.
Please, yeah.
So my goal is to get it into average rehabilitation for chronic diseased people. That's what I would like to be my contribution, but that's immense. So, and I don't even hope it will go quick, because then it will go wrong.
Okay.
So we have to do this work very slowly. We need a lot of studies. We need a lot of experience. We need a lot of credibility. And we also need that things doesn't go wrong. So I've been very careful with my work and try to always try to talk about it in a proper way and so on, so that people feel safe. But it also means that the system, that the conventional health care professionals, they should also feel safe. They shouldn't feel threatened by a method which is saying they have so good results, but they have almost no studies. So I think we have to really show respect also to the conventional healthcare practitioners. So that's the way I've been working. And of course, that takes a lot of time. But there is a movement, and a lot of people have great effect. And then we will just slowly have to continue to do studies. Also to have practical experience. And one way in there, I think, is the patient organizations. That's why I chose that, because there it's a patient's own organization, and the patients, we know from studies, they try complementary medicine and they want it, and they also want proof, because they feel on their own body this is doing something else than the medicine.
Well, what's needed to jump into, so what you're saying is, there's good evidence, there's good qualitative research, there's good anecdotal, there's good small studies, your pilot studies, all of which are promising, but we haven't kind of crossed the threshold into some more substantial kind of, or I don't know if that's the right word, but sort of a next tier of research. What's needed to shift into that direction, do you think?
I think the work we are doing now, just to continue to be patient and consistent, because I think it's moving in the right direction. And I wouldn't expect it to move in a quicker tempo than now, because we already reached quite a lot. And if you look at other phenomena like yoga was introduced in Europe in the 40s. They already knew it in the 20s in Europe, and it's only within the last 10, 20 years that it got so big.
Yeah.
It's the same with acupuncture. In the beginning, it was not accepted by any medical doctor, and now most medical doctors would say that acupuncture has a function. So I think we need time, and we should watch out that we don't push it on people, that we just accept that it takes time for people to feel safe, and also the medical doctors, they have another way of thinking. They want studies, and we have to respect that also.
Sure.
So I think we should work on all these different kind of levels.
I see. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, very cool. Well, anything else to share? Do you want anything you want to share about because you are also a TRE trainer. Do you have any? Are you available? Do you have any upcoming trainings? Are they in person? Are they online? Maybe just share a little bit about your own educational program.
Yeah. So I'm only training live.
Okay.
And I'm only training the whole education in Danish.
Okay.
And it's a difficult language to learn. But I'm also sometimes invited to do online workshops with specific themes like multiple sclerosis or chronic disease. I also put a lot of emphasis on working with the eyes. So the last 8 years, I've been studying techniques in body-oriented psychotherapy, with how to include the eyes in psychotherapy. So there also I put a lot of emphasis on eyes in TRE, and see quite good results with that also. So there I also make theme workshops working with the eyes, and that I do sometimes over internet also.
I see. Okay, wonderful. Didn't Reich had a term for what is it called? The eye block, or isn't there a phrase? He had a
yes. He called it the eye block, and then he called this whole area, he called the ocular segment.
Okay.
So yes, so
okay.
Which includes the brain and the neck.
I see. So in your specialization, your inclusion of more emphasis on the eyes, do you kind of think of it in similar terms? I mean, is this sort of a Reichian approach, would you say?
Yes, it's to get this whole area more alive.
Okay.
The face, the eyes, the brain.
Yeah. Right. He would have liked to know about. He would have been interested probably to speak with Porges about the social engagement nerve, the innervation of the face.
Yes, for sure.
Would have been an interesting conversation.
Yes.
All right. Well, Michael, this has been so enriching just to hear kind of all these different threads, and I really appreciate you taking time. Anything you feel like we should include that we haven't touched on yet?
The only thing is this, to get back to this point about working with TRE with a central nervous system disease. If you do that, you have quite good evidence that if the symptoms decrease, which we can see they do, then we have very good evidence that TRE is able to balance the central nervous system, because else the symptoms wouldn't decrease. That's my major point in my work, and that's why I did it. So it's quite complicated, but at the same time quite simple, because we can see that all kinds of symptoms can get less by some people.
Great. I like the clarity of that framing. Very cool. All right. Well, we'll include all kinds of information about your YouTube channels and everything else in our show. Well, thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.